My name is Rosa Navarro. I am 63 years old, and for most of my adult life I believed that keeping the peace was the same thing as being loved. I was wrong. I learned the difference on a Tuesday evening in early November, standing in my own kitchen, holding a dish towel I had already used 3 times that day, while my daughter-in-law Priscilla told me, not asked me, told me, that 25 members of her family would be arriving at my house on December 23rd and staying through New Year's Day. 9 days. 25 people. My house. She said it the way people announce weather. Matter of fact. Already decided. My son Mateo was sitting at the kitchen table behind her, looking at his phone. I set the dish towel on the counter and did not say anything for a moment. Then I smiled and said, "Perfect. Let me look at flights." There is a manila envelope in the bottom drawer of my desk. It has been there since October. Inside it is 18 months of receipts, utility statements, a household spreadsheet and 3 maintenance invoices, all paper-clipped by category and organized the way I have organized everything important in my life, quietly, completely, without announcing it. I put that envelope together because I am a bookkeeper by trade, and bookkeepers do not wait for a crisis to start keeping records. They keep records the way other people keep breathing. Automatically. Out of habit. Because numbers are the only things that do not editorialize. That envelope is why the conversation on that Tuesday evening went the way it did. Let me back up, because that moment did not come out of nowhere. Nothing ever does. If you are watching this and you have someone in your life who makes you feel like a guest in your own story, someone who mistakes your patience for permission, you already know exactly what I mean. That particular kind of dismissal does not arrive with fanfare. It accumulates. I raised Mateo alone from the time he was 11 years old, after his father left and took most of what we had built together. I worked as a bookkeeper for a regional property management company for 22 years. I kept the numbers clean, caught errors other people missed, and came home every evening to a son who needed dinner and help with his homework and someone to sit with him while he fell asleep, because the apartment we moved into after the divorce had pipes that made sounds he did not like in the dark. I bought that apartment when Mateo was 13. 2 bedrooms, 2nd floor, southeast corner of a building in Tucson that got enough morning light to make the kitchen feel larger than it was. I paid it off in 14 years, making extra principal payments when I could, skipping things for myself when I needed to, because I had learned early that owning something outright was the closest thing to safety that money could buy. When Mateo graduated from Arizona State, I was sitting in the 2nd row of the family section wearing a dress I had altered myself because I could not afford a new one that year. I clapped until my hands ached. I was not embarrassed about the dress. I was proud of every stitch. He married Priscilla 4 years ago. She is 31. She works in marketing, she speaks quickly, and she has a talent for framing requests as announcements so that by the time you realize you were supposed to have a choice, the conversation has already moved on. I want to be fair to her. She is not a cruel person in the way that word usually gets used. She does not raise her voice. She does not name-call. What she does is something quieter and, in some ways, harder to push back against. She simply behaves as though my preferences are decorative. Nice to have, occasionally acknowledged, never load-bearing. The house Priscilla made her announcement in is not Mateo's house. It is not their house. It is my house, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath in a quiet neighborhood outside Tucson that I purchased 6 years ago with money I had saved in increments over a decade, plus a small inheritance from my mother that I held onto through 2 recessions because I knew I would need it eventually for something that mattered. I put 20% down. I negotiated the closing costs myself. I repainted the interior over 2 weekends with help from my neighbor Dolores, who brought tamales the 2nd day and told me the sage green in the hallway was the best decision I had made in years. Mateo and Priscilla moved in 18 months ago. Mateo had taken a new position that required a longer commute, and Priscilla was between jobs after a company restructure. It was supposed to be temporary. I said 6 months and I meant it warmly. I gave them the larger bedroom, the one with the attached bath, and I moved my things into the room I use as an office so they would have more space. That was 18 months ago. The first time Priscilla made clear how she saw the arrangement, it was a Sunday in March, about 3 months after they moved in. I had been at the kitchen table since 7 in the morning working through a freelance bookkeeping project, a small landscaping business owned by a woman I had known for years who needed her quarterly reports reconciled before tax season. I had a second cup of coffee going, my reading glasses on, and the kind of quiet focus that takes a while to settle into when you are over 60 and have a lot of small things competing for your attention. The morning light was coming in at the angle I liked. I had the columns balanced through February. I was almost done. Priscilla came downstairs at 9:30. She was dressed, which meant she had plans. She looked at the kitchen table, at my papers, my laptop, my coffee, my reading glasses case, and she said, "Oh, are you still doing this?" I looked up. Still doing what? The bookkeeping thing. She opened the refrigerator and stood in front of it with the door open, which she did often. "I thought you were going to wind that down." "I enjoy it," I said. "And Mrs. Ibarra needs the help." Priscilla closed the refrigerator without taking anything out of it. She leaned against the counter and looked at me in a way that was almost kind, the way you look at someone who has made a small and forgivable error in judgment. "I just think," she said, "that at your age you've earned the right to actually rest. You don't have to keep proving things." I squared the papers in front of me before I answered. "I'm not proving anything," I said. "I'm working." She smiled, the way she often did when she felt the conversation had gone about as far as it needed to, and said, "Right. Of course." Then she picked up her bag and left. Mateo came downstairs 20 minutes later, poured himself coffee, kissed the top of my head, and did not ask how my morning was going. I finished Mrs. Ibarra's quarterly report by noon. It was accurate to the penny. I emailed it and closed my laptop and sat for a moment with my hands in my lap. I was not hurt exactly. I had been doing this long enough that hurt was not the first thing I reached for. What I felt was something more like recognition, the particular sensation of watching a pattern take its shape, the way you can see the outline of a thing before you can name it. I had seen it in ledgers before, the slow accumulation of small entries that look like nothing individually and mean everything in sum. That March morning was not an anomaly. Over the next several months, I began to understand that what Priscilla believed, genuinely, not maliciously, was that I was a supporting role in a story whose main characters were her and Mateo. I was the convenient backdrop. The woman who owned the house but did not need to be consulted about it. The mother who had already had her chapter. In May, Priscilla redecorated the living room without asking me. She moved my mother's armchair, the upholstered one green velvet, the chair my mother sat in every Sunday afternoon for 40 years, into the garage because, she explained, it made the room feel heavy. I found it next to the chest freezer when I went out for ice. I brought it back inside that same evening and put it in my office, and I did not mention it again. In June, Priscilla's younger sister Elena came to stay for 10 days. I gave Elena my office, slept on the fold-out in the laundry room, and cooked breakfast 3 mornings because Elena mentioned she liked horchata French toast and I knew how to make it. Priscilla thanked me once briefly at the end of Elena's visit, and I told her it was no trouble. It was not no trouble. But I said it was. In July, Priscilla told Mateo's cousin at a family dinner that she and Mateo were basically running the house now. I was in the kitchen when she said it. I had spent that morning reorganizing the garage over 3 days, carrying boxes I probably should not have been carrying alone, sorting hardware and holiday decorations and things that had accumulated over 6 years, so that both cars would fit inside before monsoon season. My lower back ached for 4 days afterward, and I took ibuprofen at night and did not say anything to anyone. I had kept the books for our household expenses since they moved in, the same way I had kept books my entire professional life. I tracked what I spent on groceries, utilities, household supplies, and the small ongoing maintenance costs that a house of that age requires: a new water heater element in April, a plumber for the slow drain in the hall bathroom in June, a replacement for the washing machine intake valve in August that I diagnosed myself from a YouTube video and fixed for $11 and 40 minutes of my time. I noted these things not out of resentment but out of habit. Numbers are honest. They do not editorialize. What those numbers said over 18 months was this. I had paid for every grocery run for the household, totaling just under $400 a month on average, every month since January of the prior year. That was not a complaint. I had always fed whoever was in my house, but it was a fact, the kind of fact that matters when someone tells you at the kitchen table that you have nothing left to prove. I had covered all utilities, electricity, water, gas, internet, without ever asking Mateo and Priscilla to contribute, because when they moved in I told them not to worry about it for the first few months while they got settled, and the few months became many, and I never revisited it because I did not want to make them feel unwelcome. I had spent 2 full weekends repainting the guest bathroom in early summer because Priscilla mentioned once in passing that the color felt dated. I bought the paint and the rollers and the painter's tape and spent 12 hours across 2 Saturdays making it right. I did it without being asked because I thought it would make her feel more at home. I had driven Priscilla to 2 early-morning medical appointments when Mateo was traveling for work. I sat in the waiting room for a combined 4 hours across those 2 visits, reading old magazines, and brought her back home and made her soup both times because she said she was tired afterward. She was, and I was glad to do it. But I did it. I had hosted Mateo and Priscilla's friends for dinner 4 times, 6 people, 8 people, once 11 people, cooking full meals from scratch, cleaning before and after, setting the table with the dishes my mother left me that I only brought out for guests, and retiring to my room by 9 so the younger people could have the living room to themselves. None of these things were remarkable, taken individually. That was the point. No single one of them would have justified a complaint. Together, they were simply the texture of my life in my own house for a year and a half. What Priscilla saw, I think, was a woman who liked to be busy. What she did not see or did not care to see was that the busyness had a direction. It had always been toward them. In October, after the July comment came back to me a 3rd time through different mouths, I sat down at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and started pulling the records together. Not out of anger. I did not feel angry. What I felt was the clarity that comes when you stop waiting for things to resolve on their own and decide to look at them straight. I printed the spreadsheet. I printed 18 months of utility statements. I added the maintenance receipts, the plumber's invoice from June, the hardware store receipt from August with the valve fitting on it, $11.32, stapled to a note in my handwriting that said hall bath, fixed myself 40 minutes. I paper-clipped everything by category and put it in a manila envelope that I set in the bottom drawer of my desk. I was not building a case. I was doing what I had always done, keeping an accurate record of what was real. The November conversation happened on a Tuesday. Mateo had come home from work around 6, and Priscilla had been in the kitchen when I came back from Dolores's house next door, where I had spent the afternoon helping her address Christmas cards because her arthritis made it difficult that year. My hands were cold when I came in. I remember that. I had forgotten my gloves. I was standing at the sink running warm water over my hands when Priscilla said, "Oh good, you're back. I wanted to talk to you about Christmas." I turned the water off and reached for the dish towel. "Of course," I said. "My family wants to do Christmas here this year." She said it with a brightness that was not quite natural, the brightness of someone who has rehearsed the delivery. All of them. My parents, my brothers and their families, my aunts and uncles. It would be 25 people, give or take. We'd arrive the 23rd and stay through New Year's. I looked at her. Then I looked at Mateo, who was still looking at his phone. 9 days, I said. It would be so fun. She smiled. We could do a big Christmas Eve thing, Christmas Day obviously, maybe a New Year's Eve party. It would be like a real family holiday. My chest tightened in a way I had learned to recognize, the body's signal that something needs attention before words. I breathed through it. 25 people. 9 days. In a 3-bedroom house. My 3-bedroom house. She had not asked me. She had not said, "Would this work for you?" or "What do you think?" or even "Is this okay?" She had said my family wants to do Christmas here as though the house were already hers and I were a scheduling consideration to be managed. I set the dish towel on the counter. And then something shifted. It was not anger exactly. It was more like the moment when you have been carrying something heavy for a long time and you finally set it down, and the relief is so complete it almost feels like falling. I looked at Priscilla. I smiled, a real smile, not the careful one I had been using for 18 months. "Perfect," I said. "Let me look at flights." She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "For Christmas," I said. "I've been thinking about visiting my cousin in Santa Fe. This sounds like the right time." I picked up my phone from the counter and opened the browser. "You'll have the house to yourselves. Plenty of room for everyone." Priscilla's face did something complicated. The brightness faltered and something else moved behind it, not anger yet, but the early shape of it. "Rosa," she said, "I don't think you understand. We need you here. Someone has to cook," I said, still looking at my phone. "Clean? Manage 25 guests in a 3-bedroom house for 9 days." She opened her mouth. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said. "You're very capable." I found a flight to Santa Fe departing December 22nd. Round trip, returning January 3rd. I booked it before I went to bed. The week after I booked the flight, Priscilla did not bring it up again. Neither did Mateo. I took this as a strategy rather than acceptance, the assumption that if enough time passed without discussion, I would quietly unbook the flight and fall back into my usual shape. I did not unbook the flight. What I did instead was sit down one more time with the manila envelope and go through every item once more, making sure the numbers were right, the dates were accurate, the categories were clean. I was not rehearsing for a performance. I was doing what I always did before presenting financial information to anyone. I was making sure it was true. It took 9 days. On a Friday evening in late November, Priscilla came home from dinner with her mother and 2 of her sisters, and she was bright in the way she got when she had been talking about something for a while and had arrived home still inside the momentum of it. She set her bag on the kitchen table on top of my mail, which she often did without noticing, and said, "Okay, we need to finalize the Christmas plan. My mom wants to confirm the sleeping arrangements." Mateo was on the couch. He muted the television. I was at the counter. I had been making tea. I turned around and looked at both of them and said, "All right. Let's talk about it." Priscilla sat down at the table. Mateo came in from the living room and leaned against the doorframe in the way he did when he wanted to be present without being accountable. "So you're still planning to be gone?" Priscilla asked. The brightness had a careful edge to it now. "I am," I said. "My flight leaves the 22nd. Rosa." She folded her hands on the table. "I need you to understand how this looks. My entire family is coming. My mother has been planning this for months. If you're not here, how does it look?" I asked. She paused. "It looks like you're making a point." "I'm taking a vacation," I said. "People do that at Christmas." "You've never taken a vacation at Christmas." "That's true," I said. "I spent every Christmas here. Cooking, cleaning, hosting, making sure everyone was comfortable." I picked up my tea and held it. This year I thought I'd try something different. Mateo pushed off the doorframe. "Mom, I think what Priscilla is saying is that this is a lot to manage without you." "I know," I said. "It is a lot to manage. 25 people for 9 days is a significant undertaking." I set my tea down. I walked to my office. I came back with the manila envelope. I set it on the table in front of Priscilla. I reached in and produced the spreadsheet first, placed it flat. Then the utility folder. Then the maintenance receipts, paper clipped together. "What is this?" Priscilla said. 18 months, I said. "Groceries, utilities, maintenance, repairs. Everything I've covered since you moved in." I sat down across from her. "I'm not showing you this to start a fight. I'm showing you because I think there may be some confusion about what this arrangement has looked like from my side." Priscilla looked at the spreadsheet. She looked at the utility statements. Her eyes moved down the column of monthly totals and something in her face went very still. "The groceries alone," I said, "have averaged just under $400 a month. Utilities run about $280. There was a plumber in June, $160. I fixed the washing machine myself in August, which saved somewhere between $200 and $400 depending on which plumber you call." I paused. "I'm not asking to be reimbursed. I want to be clear about that. What I'm asking is for you to understand what I have contributed to this household, and then to hear what I am telling you about Christmas." Priscilla looked up. "Which is what?" "Which is that I am 63 years old," I said, "and I live alone in a house I bought with money I earned and saved over 40 years of working. You and Mateo are welcome here. You have always been welcome here. But this house is not a venue. I am not a caterer. And I am not going to spend 9 days managing 25 guests in my own home because the alternative was never discussed with me." The kitchen was quiet. Mateo said, "Mom, I booked a room at a small inn in Santa Fe," I said. "My cousin Lupe is meeting me there on the 23rd. I've already arranged it." I looked at my son. "You can host Christmas here. I'll leave the house clean and stocked. I'll put fresh linens on the guest beds. I'll label everything in the pantry so it's easy to find." I looked at Priscilla. "I'm happy to help you plan it. But I won't be here for it, and I need that to be understood now so that no one arrives expecting otherwise." Priscilla's jaw was tight. "I told my mother you'd be here." "Then you'll need to update her," I said. The conversation did not end there. It moved the way those conversations do, through several rooms and several registers before it found its shape. Priscilla's voice climbed. She said I was being selfish. She said I was punishing her family for something that was not their fault. She said that a mother, a real mother, would not abandon her family at Christmas. I waited until she finished. You told me once, I said, that at my age I should rest, that I had earned the right to stop proving things. She blinked. That was March. I was at the kitchen table finishing quarterly reports for a client. You asked me if I was still doing the bookkeeping thing, as though the work I have done my entire life was something I should have grown out of. Her mouth opened slightly. In July you told Mateo's cousin at dinner that you two were basically running the house now. I was in the kitchen when you said it. That morning I had spent 3 days reorganizing the garage so both cars would fit before monsoon season. I carried boxes until my back gave out. I took ibuprofen for 4 days and did not mention it. Mateo looked at his hands. In September you mentioned to your mother that the house needed a lot of work when you moved in. I repainted that bathroom myself because you said the color felt dated. I bought the materials, I spent 2 Saturdays doing it, I cleaned up after myself. I didn't ask for thanks. But I'd prefer not to be told secondhand that I handed you a project. Priscilla was very still now. And 2 weeks ago you told me 25 people were coming to my house for 9 days. Not asked. Told. Because somewhere in the last 18 months the understanding became that my preferences in this house were optional. I squared the utility folder on the table in front of me. What I was actually doing during the time you were deciding I had nothing left to prove, I was tracking what this household costs and covering it. Every month. I was fixing what broke. I was driving you to appointments and cooking for your friends and sleeping in the laundry room so your sister would have a comfortable place to stay. I was carrying boxes alone at an age when I should have asked for help, and I did not ask because I did not want to hear that I was overcomplicating things. I looked at her steadily. I was not retired. I was not resting. I was working the same way I have always worked, just without a title this time. Priscilla looked at Mateo. He did not look back. I love my son, I said. And I want this to work. But it will only work if we are honest about what it has been. I pushed back my chair and stood up. I'm going to Santa Fe. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas. I did not slam the door to my office. I closed it quietly behind me and sat in the dark for a moment with my hands in my lap, feeling the particular stillness of someone who has finally said the true thing out loud. The fallout came in pieces over the following week. Priscilla called her mother that same night. I could hear her voice through the wall, tight and fast. The next morning her mother called Mateo. I did not hear that conversation, but I saw its effect. Mateo came to my office door around noon, knocked twice the way he had since he was a child, and asked if we could talk. Patricia reached into the folder and produced the first set of documents, placing them on the table one at a time. The 2007 vendor contract renegotiation, she said. Rosa's signature is on the amendment. The savings to the company over 3 years are documented in the annual accounts. She placed a second set. The 2004 insurance negotiation, 8 months of correspondence. The settlement was 20% above what the company's own attorney projected. Rosa handled this process directly and without assistance. A third set. 12 lease amendments across 4 commercial properties. Rosa reviewed and marked up every one. In 3 cases, her revisions changed material terms. Marco was looking at the documents. His jaw had a particular set to it that I recognized, the same set it had when he was a teenager and had been caught in something and was calculating how to respond. We're not disputing that Rosa contributed, he said. That's not what this is about. What is it about then? Patricia asked with genuine curiosity in her voice. The estate was structured by Dad, Marco said. Legally. With counsel. What's in front of us doesn't change the legal distribution. No, Patricia said. These documents don't change the distribution. They establish the basis for a separate claim, a claim of equitable contribution. Which is a different thing. She produced the second folder. Ernesto Vidal retained me 18 months before his death to advise him on exactly this question. He understood that the estate distribution as structured might be challenged by the primary beneficiaries, and he wanted the documentation in place to support Rosa's independent position. She set the folder on the table. He also funded a separate account outside the estate. You've been notified of this through Gerald Pratt's office, which is not subject to challenge because it was never part of the estate to begin with. The room was quiet. Brent leaned toward Marco and said something low. Marco listened, then looked at me directly. "Mom," he said, and now the management register was gone, replaced by something rawer. "Did you know about this account before Dad died?" "No," I said. "But you knew he was doing this. Building a case." "I did not," I said. "I found out the same way you did. After." He sat back. He looked at the documents spread across the table. For a moment he looked his age, not 41 with the authority of operations director, but 41 with the specific expression of a man who had made a calculation that had turned out to be wrong. It was Daniela who spoke next. She had been quiet through Patricia's presentation, and she had the particular stillness of someone who processes quickly and doesn't show the processing. She looked at me across the table. "We said you were a support to Dad," she said. "We didn't mean it the way it sounded." "You meant it exactly the way it sounded," I said. "I want to walk through it if that's all right. I've been thinking about it for a while." "Nobody told me not to." "At the will reading," I said, "Marco, you told me the estate was complex and required people who understood complexity. I had spent 39 years managing the financial infrastructure of that estate, including the books for the first 11 years before we could afford an accountant. I understood the complexity. What I didn't have was a title." Marco didn't respond. "At Carl Huerta's dinner," I said, "you told Carl I had been a great resource for the historical context. I had organized that dinner for 26 consecutive years. I negotiated the catering contracts. I managed the vendor list. I printed the programs. What I was the reason the evening worked. What you called me was an archive." Daniela was looking at the table. "And Daniela," I said, "you called me 2 weeks after the funeral and suggested I think about whether a house that size was realistic for a woman alone. I had lived in that house for 27 years. I had maintained it, managed it, made every repair decision, paid every bill. The question of whether it was realistic for me was not a practical question. It was an instruction to start making myself smaller." The room held the particular silence of people who have heard something true said plainly. "I want you to understand what I was doing during those years," I said. "While you were growing up and after. I renegotiated the primary vendor contract in 2007 and saved this company $40,000 a year for 3 years. I navigated 2 workers' compensation disputes that our insurance carrier declined and won both. I reviewed every lease amendment on every property your father ever owned. I managed the 2004 insurance claim for 8 months and settled it 20% above projections. I organized the contractor dinner for 26 years. I paused. I also raised 3 children, one of whom needed medical monitoring from birth that required consistent attention for 25 years, and I managed that without ever describing it as a burden or asking for acknowledgement." Tomas, at the end of the table, looked down at his hands. "I am not telling you this to relitigate the estate," I said. "Patricia has the legal matter in hand, and that process will run its course. I am telling you this because you are my children, and I would rather you understand what you dismissed than have you find out from documents in a conference room what your mother actually did." I picked up the folder Patricia had set in front of me. I set it back down. Then I stood. "I'm going to go home now," I said. "When you're ready to talk, not to manage me, not to explain what's realistic, but to talk, I'll be there." I picked up my bag. Patricia closed her briefcase. We walked to the door together and I did not look back, and I did not let the door close hard behind me.